This is the second video of the first lecture. In this video, I introduce you to development environments for Python. After seeing this video, you will be able to describe the role of Python development environments, such as Visual Studio Code or Jupyter Notebook. You will be able to enumerate the functionalities of these two development environments, and you can execute an existing Python code using them. You can also describe the advantages of VS Code over Jupyter Notebook. Note that I use the abbreviations of VS Code or VSC for Visual Studio Code. So developing a machine code is difficult, time-consuming, and error-prone. It's difficult to memorize the zeros and ones for different instructions. Therefore, programmers use high-level computer languages that humans can read and understand, languages like Python, C++, and Java. If you compare these two, you can see that, oh, this is more understandable to human beings. Python is great for data analysis, while C++ is great for gaming and, uh, real-time applications. Java is great for building enterprise applications. So as students of EOR, you are using Python because it's great for your future job, which is mostly about and analyzing data. Python has an extension that is .py, but Jupyter Notebook uses a different Python extension, which is IPYNB. Uh, .py files include instructions that programmers that can understand, as you can see here, but CPUs only understand machine code. So we need interpreters that can turn these high-level computer languages to CPU understandable instructions. And this is done by by the interpreters that were built in Jupyter Notebook or Visual Studio Code. They also make programming way easier. You don't need to memorize many instructions. So a development environment is a combination of interpreter and uh, some other features that make programming way easier for you. Note that you will never see the machine codes in this class. You just want to know what goes behind these development environments. So first, let's uh, learn how to work with Visual Studio Code. VSC has several panels. For example, panel for the programmer view, you write down the code here, and then when you try to run it, you'll see the user view here. You enter, for example, you give values to the program, and then you see the results. You can also see the states of the variables, during executing program line by line. So here you see that a variable uh, is created, it's called S, and the value inside that variable is Amin. You can also see the list of all files. If you click on this icon, this is inactive here at the moment. So how can you create and execute a Python file? First, you need to assign a folder to your .py files. For that, you need to go to File, Open Folder. Then you need to add a .py file to that folder. That means that after creating or opening a folder, you place the mouse next to the name of the folder. You'll see these icons, they appear to you. You need to click on New File and then give it a name with an extension of .py. Then you click on test.py and you can write your code in the programmer's view panel. Then you can just click on Run and then you can choose Python. So let me show you, this is the older version of VS Code if you have it. Let me show you how this is done in the new version where debug menu is replaced with run menu. So here you go to the File menu, submenu of Open Folder, create a kind of folder in the address that you want. I'm going to call it test, and then I'm going to select this folder. Okay, now this is the test folder. Next to that, if I place the mouse here, I need to click on this new file and just give it a name, the file test1.py. So this extension is very important. So if this is the first time that you are using your Visual Studio Code, you may see, a message pops up here that asks you to install the Python package. So you need to just click on that and install it, then you're fine. So here you can just write down print 1+1 or any other codes that you want. Then you go to run, start debugging, or press F5. You select Python here. And now you can see the result of this. So this is 2. Sometimes for the very first time after you open the Visual Studio Code, you see some other messages here. You don't need to mind them. Just run it one more time. You don't see them. So you just see 2 and everything is fine. And if you don't like seeing all these, just type CLS and then press enter. Then you know it's fresh. To go back to the Explorer panel, you can create new files here, test2.py and so on and so forth. So you can have several .python files here. As you just saw, every time that I run the program, it asks if I want to uh, debug a Python file. You can just set it once for a folder so that you do not see this dialog box again. You must open a file with .py extension first, then go. So I already opened a .py file. Then you go to run and add configuration. You choose Python file here. So a new file called launch.json is created, and it is inside a folder .vs code. So you see this part. Then you try to run this. So this time it didn't ask. You don't see the dialog box again. So this makes you faster during the exam. But sometimes you see that when you try to run this file, you see many error messages here. Just go and delete this file, and then try to make it again using the same process. So how VS Code makes programming easier? VS Code has 2 features. It has command suggestion widget, so you don't need to memorize Python commands. It also makes debugging very easier. What is debugging? I'm going to explain what it is, but it allows you to execute a program line by line and see the state of the variables in the RAM as a result of executing those lines. So this is very handful. It makes programming and finding the issues in your file, in your program, very easy. So first, this is a suggestion widget. As you can see here, uh, you don't need to memorize the command. You can choose commands from a list that pops up automatically, and then you can just choose the command that you want and then press tab. It's going to be there. You can also see how you can use this print function. There are several help sentences here. So let me show you here. So when you try to just write down print, you see there's a list of commands that you can use. Just go over print and then press tab, and then when you open a rounding bracket, when you type a rounding bracket, you can all see what kind of values you can give to these functions. So this is great. You don't need to memorize things. You have help at your hand. Um, the, another great thing about suggesting the suggestion is that for even more complex structures, for example, an if statement, you can just write down if and then choose the snippet that you want. You click on them. It shows how you need to write this if statement, or if you want to write down a for statement, again, same thing. Click on for, it shows you how you can write for, and then you can use uh, these to just the snippet, the structure to write the program that you want. You can also execute the commands line by line, and that's another great thing about VS Code. Um, the thing is that you just need to add a breakpoint to a line. So you need to place the cursor next to the line that you want to start line by line execution from. You see a dull red. If you click, you see a light red circle there. That means if you press F5 or if you run uh, the program, Visual Studio Code runs everything, every lines before this line. So here line 1 is executed. It stops at the breakpoint. If you press F10, that line will be executed, only that line. But if you press F5, the rest of the lines will be executed. So let me show you how this works. Let me open another folder, codes, select, and here you will see, for example, here you can just add a breakpoint. You see this dull circle here, click on that, you will see a light circle. That means everything is executed up to this point. So if you click on run, start debugging, it stops at these rows. You see variables I, J, and K are created in the RAM, but variables A, B, C, X, and Y have not been created yet. If I click on F10 or press on this button, this line is executed. As a result, A is also created. But if I click continue, it executes all lines. Okay, so again, this is the variables panels. You see the current value of the variables here. You can use this button to execute only one line. You can stop the execution by pressing Shift F5 or this icon, or you can press this button. This will execute up to the next breakpoint actually, because in the previous file I didn't have any breakpoints. Everything was executed, and then it VS Code got out of the program. And the highlighted line is executed if you press F10 or again this button. Okay, what is debugging? The great thing about VS Code is that it makes debugging super easy. And debugging is about finding and removing bugs, and bugs are problems in the codes. So VLC helps helps you resolve different types of bugs, including syntax error, runtime errors, and semantic errors. I'm going to touch them here, uh, but the details will be given to you in the next lectures. So first of all, VSC can help you resolve syntax errors before even running a code. Sometimes you see some red lines uh, under some codes. That means something is wrong here. You need to place the mouse on that red line. A message pops up like this. For example, here it says that missing parenthesis, a rounded bracket is missing here. So it helps you, it tells you that no, you need to add a parenthesis or a rounded bracket here. It can also help you with runtime errors. Sometimes VSC cannot figure out some mistakes when you're writing your code. Only after pressing F5 or running the program, it finds out a problem. So it usually stops at the problematic row. As you can see here, a red line is under that problematic row and a message also pops up. For example, here it says that the print name is not defined. You were trying to use a built-in function called print. You seem to want to use a different function called print, but you haven't defined that function. So here it helps you in a way to resolve the issue. But sometimes VSC uh, cannot show you the problem, and that's but you as the programmer know that the problem exists. How do you know that? So after executing a line, VSC usually shows the state of the RAM, as I just showed you. So you see the variables that have been created and their values. So this feature allows you to find mistakes that VS Code cannot find. We call them semantic errors. What are those mistakes? You see that variables contain values that you did not expect. So you are here, you expected J to have a value of 2, for example, but you see 1 here. That means there is a semantic error. Or something is printed and the output is different from your expectation. So we call these semantic errors, errors that VSC cannot find, but you as programmers know that there is a problem. The program doesn't act according to your expectation. So there are different ways that VSC helps you to find a problem and resolve it. But but sometimes the error messages are not sufficiently expressive. If that's the case, you need to use Google as a last resort. Not the TAs, not instructors, Google. So start with Google. Google the error message and add Python. So you see there's a zero division by zero. It is highly probable that you figure out, oh, the problem is that I'm dividing a number by zero. That's the problem. But even if you cannot understand this, copy and paste the error message in Google and add Python. Then you see many hits. Google retrieves many hits, and usually stackoverflow.com gives you good responses. It shows you how to resolve the issues. VS Code also makes code easier to read by color coding the commands. So for example, you see the variables, which are like storage boxes in the RAM. They contain values. It makes them white. It also makes data types. Each variable has a data type, int, for example, or integers, async or strings. I'm going to explain that in the next video. But it makes them light green, so I can easily find, oh, these are the data type or typecasting functions. It also shows the basic functions like add, the addition, multiplication using white. color, but it uses a different color, yellow, for some complex function like printing or getting input from users. So these functions, they do complex things for us. Visual Studio Code makes them yellow. Or if you want to write some commands for the next coder who wants to change this code, you can just easily put a kind of a square here, uh, or the pound sign here, and it makes VS Code makes it dark green. That shows that Python ignores this line completely. It can also uh, it also makes the strings orange. That means Python won't interpret them. It doesn't look for keywords like input, range, or int inside that. It just knows that these are not commands. So VS Code helps us with having a readable, easily understandable codes. I'm going to touch on these, in the next lecture, so don't worry about these various types of commands. Just have some ideas about them. Okay, that was VS Code. Now, uh, we I want to quickly show you how we can use Jupyter Notebook. Jupyter Notebook can be installed on your computer. There's an installation page um, in Canvas. You can use them, but you can also go to this web address, enter your username and password, and then um, your Tilburg University username and password to use Jupyter Notebook. But even the version that you have on your computer is going to be almost the same. So how can you create and execute a Python file? After entering jupyter.ubt.nl, you'll see a function like this. You can go to File, New, or just create, click on this sign to create a file to the list of files. You'll see an icon like this under Notebook Python 3. Just click on that to create a file. Let me show you that here. So here you can just go to File, New, Notebook. You need to select Python 3, or you can just easily click on this and click Notebook Python 3. And then you can just rename it to whatever you want. Rename test for IPYNB again, or delete the file that you don't like it. So in test 4, you can just start writing your codes here. Print 1 plus 1 and press run. You see the result, or 1 plus 1. So that's the great thing about Jupyter. You don't need to write down print. But as for the class, you are required to always run the print because you are going to have issues if you don't them in some cases. So this is how you can create a Python file. You can write a code in the Jupyter Notebook. So you can easily write the code here and use this button to execute the code. Every now and then you may want to start everything over. Just click on this icon and then start running your code. You'll see the result after each cell. So there are many cells. You can add many cells and add codes to them. How can you debug in Jupyter Notebook? The thing is that unfortunately in Jupyter Notebook you don't have the variables window. So you need to use print. You need to use the print function if you want to know the current status of a variable. So for example, here you want to know the current status of I and j and k. You need to write down print I, print j, and print k. It shows that I is 0, j is 1, and k is not defined yet because k is going to be executed here. So this is quite troublesome, but Jupyter Lab is resolving this issue. You need to also know that in Jupyter Notebook you don't create Python files, you create IPYNB files. And these files cannot be executed by Python interpreters. For example, you cannot run these files using Visual Studio Code. Because in the exam I use Visual Studio Code to run your files, you cannot upload IPYNB files. You see, behind the scene, IPYNB files are like JSON files. You see, it's not Python here. So therefore, we cannot execute this file using Visual Studio Code. How can you turn IPYNB files into .py files in the exams? You need to go to File, Export Notebook as executable script. It creates a .py file for you. So let me show you here. File. Please, you need to select the file that you want to export. File, Export Notebook as, and then executable scripts. See, now I can store test for that file here and save it anywhere that I want. So another thing is that you need a kind of suggestion widget of Visual Studio Code, but you don't have it here. To get help about a function, you can use help or the question mark. You can write out help print and it tries to explain to you, what you can do. How can you use this function? If you want to get a list of all functions and class and data types, you can just type dir two underscores built in and another two underscores, and then you see a list of all functions, classes, methods, data types that you can use. So getting help on Jupyter is also a little bit tricky. So if I want to compare Jupyter Notebook with Visual Studio Code, you see it has a great format for sharing codes and commands. It's more beautiful. It has better visualization and graphics if you need them. But as for new students or even professional students, debugging, professional programmers, debugging is difficult. It doesn't have the variable windows. Commands must be almost memorized. The help and dir commands are not as helpful as VS Code's suggestion widget. But these issues are being resolved in Jupyter Lab, not Jupyter Notebook. So to give you a summary of this video, we learned that Python is a high-level computer language, and we need an interpreter to turn them into CPU understandable instructions. This is done by interpreters built in either VS Code or Jupyter Notebook. We also learned how to work with VS Code or Jupyter Notebook. We learned how we can debug syntax, runtime, and semantic errors with them. We also found that VS Code provides a better debugging experience than Jupyter Notebook. So in the next video, I will introduce you to some basic Python commands.